Hey folks, Coach Patrick here from Endurance Nation, the world's largest and most active online triathlon team. Endurance Nation's been around since 2007, and this is part of our weekly Coach Chat series where either Coach Rich or myself spend some time covering a particular topic for our members and then answer any questions they may have about their training, etc. It's an opportunity for the members to connect with us live, not just in forums or on the phone or at races, or at camps or anywhere else, but live in person on the web. That's kind of a neat value add that we have, and it's something I actually enjoy doing. And so this week, today, May 27th, a special Tuesday night edition, thanks to Memorial Day yesterday. Thank you to all of you who do serve our country and who have served. I'm going to talk a little bit about in-season fitness testing. Now, this is a concept that comes up frequently during the race season. And mainly because people don't want to test, right? You know, it's the last couple of weeks to their race, and you know, they're like, "Look, I'm doing these long rides, I'm doing these long runs. You know, the last thing I want to do is fire up an FTP test on the bike or a VDOT test on the run. Why? You know, why do I have to do that stuff? What's it really going to do for me?" And it's not so simple as to decide whether or not it's something that you enjoy doing. The question is not do you or do you not enjoy testing. You know, very few people do. Probably just 5% of people who test enjoy testing. But the point is rather, what is the value, what is the outcome of that test, and how will that help you overall in your race or with your training? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in-season testing focus, because I want to hopefully redirect the conversation away from is this something I really want to do, and rather have it be a question about you and what your expectations are for the race. You know, if you're expecting total awesomeness at this race, then we want to know where your fitness is at, right? And commensurately, if we have no idea, what your fitness is up to, then we do want to know that. Okay. So with that said, I'm going to dive in. For those of you who are interested in this topic, tune in, stay here. I'll be talking about it. If you have other questions related to your training, feel free to save those to the end. I'm happy to answer them, and we'll sort of chat and do the Q&A there at that point. Okay. So before we dive in, let me talk quickly about what fitness testing really is. Fitness testing inside Endurance Nation is essentially functional testing. That is, we have you do it yourself in an environment in which you can hopefully replicate that test. We do not want you to go to a lab, pay special money, get put in a bod pod. I have no idea what sort of other high-tech, more outlandish ways of measuring your fitness you could possibly come up with, but they are out there. And more often than not, they're very unstable, I want to say. You know, the more technical, the more high-tech something gets, the more even, one small change in value can really rejigger, mess up the results of that test and make it hard for you to understand where you're going. Whereas, for example, on a run test, I want you to map out a 5K loop around your house or work or perhaps the local track, and I want you to run that, and you can run it multiple times a year, and you can compare, test 1 to test 2 to test 3, and eventually over time you get really, really good at understanding what your fitness level is and where your strengths are, and so on. Okay, and the bike is the same. The bike, typically we have you test indoors in the winter and outdoors when the weather turns nice. If you have a heart rate monitor, it's a 40-minute time trial. If you're on a power meter, then we have a mix of a 5-minute and 20-minute test where we use to combine those two to determine your training zones. In season, you'll test outside, and so you may do it on a hill, you may do it in a flat section, wherever you can be the safest, ultimately, is what we want. Ideally, there's no real downhill sections in that test. And some people even test indoors in season just to kind of keep it consistent across the board. Whatever works for you, I'm totally down with that. Okay. So as we think about what the point of the testing is inside Endurance Nation, the point of the testing really is to help us determine your training zones. So I have you do a VDOT test, because that VDOT test, no lie, will tell me what your fitness is. It also tells me a little bit about you and where you're at. And then we use those numbers through our calculators to create your training zones. More often than not, just due to the human condition and our tendency to kind of inflate our abilities, people generally will remember themselves as faster or stronger than they actually are. Part of what makes human beings awesome, right? And many of us live up to that hype, but some of us don't. And one of the worst things you could possibly do as an athlete is sentence yourself to weeks of training, hard training, at an intensity level that's too high for you to sustain. And so our functional tests solve that issue by having you really determine what your actual numbers are, and then we use those numbers. More often than not, they're lower than you wanted, but they're accurate. And we use those numbers and we train them up. Lower than you wanted now just means you're going to improve. That means your training is going to be more effective and you'll be more able to sustain your training across a year. So first and foremost, testing for us is about determining your training zones. Okay. Then testing is also used for us to determine your race paces. Okay. So I'm not going to get into too many specifics here because this is a public video, but we do use the test results in different values in different zones as a means of giving you a target for which to approach your race. This is a tool primarily for younger or more novice athletes. As you become more and more experienced, you'll have your own performance-related resume, of where you can be. In other words, your past performance is the best predictor of future performance. If you've run a couple Ironman marathons and you tend to be between 340 and 355, then that's a pretty good bet of where you're going to be on race day versus just what one random 5K test may say about you or 5K race. Okay, so generally we use that. So early on, these tests also become a target for your race paces, and they're values that you'll use in key race simulation workouts, as well as any other race-related effort work you may do in the preparation up to your big race. And so again, early on, it's about the proper training zones and giving you the right intensity. Later on, it's more about specific race efforts. In between there, you do test again. We usually test you anywhere between every 4 to 8 weeks inside interpretation. And those intermediary tests, the third level tests, those are designed for us to see how well you're absorbing training. I don't expect you to get stronger every single test, but I do expect you to be improving. And sometimes that means just better execution across the test, better, not perhaps the same number or statistically insignificant number, but better execution of that number. Or it's just straight up improvement. Of course, there could be bad weather, you could have a bad day, maybe you had 19 burritos last night and a bunch of chimichangas and you can't move your legs or your stomach, but hopefully you know better than that and you can put together good results. So those tests for me tell me things are going well. So if someone is in the middle of their year and they're going along and they do their tests in week 10 or week 12, say, and they do their tests and all of a sudden the numbers are way lower than they've expected, that is an early indicator for me that perhaps something is not right. They may be carrying too much fatigue, there may be some issues. So typically for me as a coach and for you as a self-coached athlete, that's a warning sign to kind of dive in and be like, hey, this may be nothing, but let's take another look under the hood here. It's kind of like, if you always know that you drive your car 5 days a week to work and back again, and you need to fill up your car every Friday because across the 7 days you get back there, you're good. And all of a sudden, you're doing the same driving, but now you have to fill it up every Wednesday, or rather every 5 days. So it's Friday to Wednesday, then Wednesday to Monday, then Monday to Saturday. And you're like, wait a minute, what happened to my happy 7 days? That mile per gallon metric you have there related to your car, something's wrong. There could be something wrong with your tires, there could be something wrong with your engine performance. But regardless, you have an indicator that something is not right. Now you can dig deeper. And essentially, that's what that testing becomes for us. And so, in general, we have 3 phases of testing, right? I talked about one is early on training zone indicators, etc. Number 2 is for younger athletes, it's more of a race pace predictor and a tool you can use to set the right paces on race day. And then third, it's a tool to manage our expectations as athlete and coach, that we're seeing the progress we want to see across a year, and if we're not, then we can address those issues. Okay. Now, what does it mean to have your fitness across a year? I talked about this in another webinar a couple weeks ago, but just to recap, generally, most people tend to have peak bike and run fitness at the end of the out season, and then as they move across their year, things kind of change. They carry more and more fatigue as the volume goes up. Things become harder. You have less sleep, you have more training, you have more stress at work, etc. Generally, your body takes kind of a bit of a beating, and it's hard to keep those out-season numbers at that level across your entire year for the bike and the run. It's just the way it is. So you may exit the out-season at 300 watts, but by the time you get to your race 20 weeks later, you might be at 280, and that's not a bad thing. Again, on race day, your success in a half Ironman or Ironman is a function not of your 20-minute power, like we have for our test result in the out season, but your 3-hour power, say for a half, or your 5-hour power, say for your Ironman. And those are very different metrics indeed, and your training is specific to your race, so your ability to sustain such a high effort intensity does, in fact, diminish. Now that you understand what the 3 sort of different types of tests are, it's an opportunity for us to dive in a little bit deeper and say, okay, well, what do we do when we come up to that last test? About 4 weeks out from your race, and you have to decide whether or not you're going to test. Okay, so before I dive into it, for those of you who are on the team, I'm going to jump into the chat room here and drop in the link to this flow chart that I made, so bear with me. Hold on. I suggest that you guys go ahead and when you get this link, hopefully it shows up, there it is, I suggest you right-click that link. If you click it here, then you'll all disappear, and then you won't be in the chat room anymore. So right-click and open in a new tab or a new window. So you can see that, okay? And I will do the same thing myself. And so this page here, I'm going to put the video in eventually. It's not ready yet because we're doing it now. But the chart you'll see at the bottom is right there, okay? So specifically, the goal behind this flow chart is to help you walk through the decision-making process of whether or not you should be testing, okay? So the first and most important question I want to ask you in your, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to go to your A-race self is, do you actually know what your current values are? Sometimes it's a gut feeling. Someone's a more experienced athlete. You've been at this for many years. You kind of know within a couple watts what your FTP is, or you kind of know within a couple numbers of what your interval run pace, your zone 4 threshold pace might be on the run. You just kind of know those numbers. You're always trying to improve them, but you kind of know what they are, right? For newer athletes, you don't have that fluency. You just don't know. And so if you don't know what your actual testing numbers are, then the answer is no, and you go on and we need to test for good data. We need good data, test data for a good race, so you do the test, okay? If you do know your numbers, then my next question for you is, are you actually hitting your targets in training? Okay, so if you know that your FTP on the bike is 300, but in your training, week after week, you can't hit more than 280. It's just brutal. You're getting myrtleized, and you're just not feeling it. In fact, you're much happier at 280 than you are at that 300. No matter what you do, even no matter how you break up the intervals, whatever you do, you just can't get that 300. Okay? Similarly for the run. So you have to ask yourself, are you hitting those numbers in your training, in your intervals for the bike and the run? And there's 3 potential answers there. There's you're below those numbers, so you're below your 300, right? You're 280. You're at your exact numbers where you think you should be, or you're better than them. Okay? So let's work in order of easiest to hardest. If you are better than your targets than you thought you were before, so if you're outperforming your metrics, then we absolutely want you to test because you want better numbers leading into your race day. I want to know for sure what your FTP is or what your VDOT is if your numbers are better, if you've been outperforming your previous training. Because there's an opportunity there for you to race at a different level. But more importantly, we want you to really have a true understanding of the decisions you're making on race day. If your FTP truly is 300 and you've thought it was 260 all along or 280 all along, say, and it truly is 300, then I want you to understand that you can ride at 280 and still feel good because your FTP is really 300, right? So there's some importance here of knowing what those numbers are so we can make a better set of informed decisions on race day. Now, what if you're training roughly at the same numbers? If there's no change in your relative fitness, if you've been doing your intervals at 280 watts and it's always been 280 watts and it's still hard for you and you still kind of have a tough time in the last couple minutes of each set on the bike or same for the run, in that case, I don't really need you to test. If your numbers are the same, the other function of a test week is also a rest week. So I'd much rather have you rest, okay? You've been putting some good miles in your legs and for the most part, you've been absorbing it. So the numbers have been pretty consistent, and I'm happy with that. So, whether or not you test is really up to you. You don't have to. We have alternate workouts listed, so your choice, okay? Dealer's choice. You go nuts. All right. So the third and final option here is if you are below your target number. So let's say your target number was 300 on the bike, but now you're at 280, and you're like, man, those 20 watts, this is killing me. So I need to ask you two questions. One, is that number below, that 280 versus your 300, is that 300, that test value that you're comparing these workouts to, is that from the out-season exit point, or is that from another training, another testing cycle within the race prep training cycle? So, you know, we have you test in week 12 and week 8 and week 4. So is that 300 watts from week 12 or week 8? Or is it from, you know, week 14 of the out-season, which was, you know, months ago, all right? And there's a difference there. If it's below your out-season test value, then I do want you to test again. Your out-season value is high, and typically that leads you to have more of an inflated sense of ability on race day. So I do want to test whether it's for the bike or the run or both, so we have more specific information for you heading into your race. Okay. If it's below your race prep training value, so let's say in week 8 you tested at 300 watts, and in week 4 you're at 280 watts. I'm not worried about that result. Sure, the last 4 weeks have been pretty darn hard. You've been doing some serious work, and I would expect those numbers to drop. So you're aware of your numbers, you know that they've dropped, and we can make a good informed decision about that, how you're going to pace yourself on race day. But because those numbers have dropped, that tells me you're probably carrying some fatigue. I'd much rather you rest this week than put yourself through the stress of testing. Okay? So using this flow chart, we've kind of covered all the different options we have for what it means to manage your last test before your race. At the end of the day, I want you towing the line on race day, knowing exactly the effort you need to put out on the bike and the run to have the race that your fitness, that your body can sustain, right? You know, we talk about in the context of an Ironman, a great run is simply not slowing down, right? And that great run is set up by many things, but more often than not, a huge percentage of what it's set up by is a really, really quality bike. And a quality bike is done through knowing what your numbers are and then riding to those numbers, okay? So don't just blow off in-season testing because it just sounds not fun or not what you want to do. The more serious you are about your race, the more serious you are about your preparation, the more you need to embrace testing as a tool to make sure that you are continually moving forward. And if you're not, taking the steps required to help you recover and adjust so that we can continue the progress going and help you achieve your goals. All right. I hope that was helpful for you guys. I enjoyed putting that little flow chart together today, and I think it will prove helpful. I don't know how many people will click the link, but I think it will prove helpful to people. So I'm going to head over to the chat room right now and see if you guys have any questions for me, specifically related to this flow chart. Hopefully it makes sense. Of course, all of you who are members will see it in the chat room, and I'll link it up on this wiki page as well. But if you have other questions as well, I'm happy to take those too. So don't feel like you have to get locked into this one particular topic. Okay. So why don't you head over to the little chat box there and type in your questions for me. I'd love to see them. Okay. And like I said, when I'm done with this chat, I'll head back over to that wiki page tonight, and I will update it with this video. Make sure you guys have it, and it's all set from there. Okay. While I'm waiting for you guys to type your questions, I will talk about another element about testing that I think is important, especially for veteran athletes. You know, one of the things that I definitely have noticed in the past is that using myself as a case example, so total N equals 1 sample size, but it's very easy for me to get caught into doing volume, doing longer rides, longer workouts. You know, one of my favorite pre-Kona workouts is going to Ironman Louisville and riding the course, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, doing 300 miles, back to back to back 112s, getting really strong, feeling the heat, pacing, nutrition, all that stuff. It's a really great workout. But at the end of the day, volume or endurance is not what's setting me apart from the best version of me on race day. More often than not, what I'm missing in my repertoire, in year 10, 11, 12 of competitive racing, is that peak speed, is that extra gear. And so one of the things that I focused on in 2012, which was the last time that I went to Kona, I won my age group in Texas, and then went to Kona again in October, was specifically focusing on that high-end fitness, trying to come up with a basic week that worked for me, and really work to keep my my functional threshold power up high every week. And when I started noticing that number dropping, I would rest and take time. So as you begin to move down the athlete spectrum, once you move into the 3rd year of your Endurance Nation membership or beyond, something for more experienced athletes to consider is the importance of quality over quantity, and at least locking that quantity into specific periods like camps, etc. But not trying to use it as a tool day after day, week after week to continue to build fitness, because your body can easily process that work over time. You know, like if my zone 2 is 220 watts, my body can do that all day right now for 8 hours. So going out and riding 8 hours at that doesn't really do very much for me on a repeat basis. But spending a lot of time at 280 or 260 really will. And so being mindful of your training and using your test values and your ability to sustain that high-end test value effort in training as a marker for when you need recovery is definitely more of an advanced tool as well. That's a little bit of a bonus, but it's something that I really enjoyed working on in 2012. Good God, almost 2 years ago now. But really, I think is a powerful consideration for people who are looking for peak performance, who simply can't want awesomeness on race day and yet, you know, choose ignorance over knowing your real numbers on a daily basis. There's just no hiding when it comes to elite performance, okay? Some people can wing it, but most of us are just human beings, right? Okay, let's see here. Okay, Jerry's got a nutrition question, so Jerry, I'm going to come back to you. Brad says, I was scheduled for test week this week in my Ironman plan leading up to Placid, but I'm racing Kwasi, so I opted not to test. Was this the decision a mistake, and can I plug a bike test in any other week? Brad, that's a great question, and actually one of the reasons why I did this flow chart as well, because I really want people to kind of think about it. In your case, with a race looming, there really is no need to test. You know, I want you to get the work in. You're going to do some great work this weekend, and Kwasi itself becomes, in a well-executed Kwasi, becomes a great benchmark for us to make some decisions about your pacing at Placid. Not to say that the bike or the run is going to be the same as Placid. In fact, in many ways, I think it's a little bit harder than you'll find in like Placid. But we want you to be able to race that well, because how you perform in hour 6 of your half Ironman is really important to us. I don't want you to, I'm not worried about what your bike value is right now. So you have your numbers, you know your numbers, you're going to ride those numbers at a half Ironman level this weekend, and then we'll have some results out of that, and that value is important. So just like at the end of the out season, I want you to do a half marathon as a test for your VDOT, because it's much more related to the rest of your year in terms of the volume you'll be doing either in a half or a full. So too, within the context of your year, a well-executed half Ironman, for example, is a for me, much more relevant data set in making decisions about your fitness than just a 5K test. That 5K test or that VDOT test, sorry, the FTP test on the bike, those are just simple tools we can use to manage your fitness when we don't have the context or the scheduled event coming up. So you're totally fine in that regard, Brad. Okay, I look forward to seeing you this weekend. All right, let's see here. Heading back to Jerry's question. He's got a question about using Perform. I'm pretty sure a 20-ounce bottle is 175 calories, Jerry. It's about the same as you mix. Okay, so Jerry's question is, a nutrition calculator says you should aim for about 300 calories an hour. It takes about 45 ounces an hour of fluids, and then he works in some goo and a power bar to get the calories. But if he takes in 2 bottles on the course, it's 270. So if he takes in his goo and a bar, then he's way over his calorie needs. If I cut Perform, I'll be under my fluid needs. How do you balance using Perform and not go over on calories but low on fluids? Jerry, this is actually a really great question, because I think not enough people talk about nutrition as a fluid, solid solution. I think people think about nutrition as calories, and they think about hydration. Hydration is just a generic thing, like don't do drugs, you know, stay hydrated. That doesn't really help you. And so in our world, the way that we set up this whole nutrition protocol for you is that the first thing you do is a sweat test. And that sweat test determines the fluids that you need. And then you use those fluids when you go in and do the math on your body mass, etc. That will also give you a number. So let's just say your calculator says you need to drink 2 bike bottles an hour. So you got to drink 40 ounces of fluid an hour, right? Which from Ironman performance standards is 350 calories, because 2 by 175. And then the nutrition calculator says that you need 400 calories. Let's make it up. So you've got 50 more calories to come up with across that hour, and you can come up with those 50 calories. You might do a gel, which is a little bit more, maybe do a half power bar, which is a little bit more, but you've got something there. Okay. But most people will say, oh, I need 300 calories. And well, a gel's 100 calories, so that leaves me just 200 calories, and a bottle of Perform is 175, so I just need 25 calories, so I'll have a Kit Kat. Yay. And there they go. And they're not really thinking about nutrition from the important side of having fluids in your body, and more importantly, the concentration of fluids, which is Ironman Perform, which is sort of a 7% carbohydrate solution, which is ideal for digestion, much better than goos, and much better than gels, and much better than bars, is that Perform. And so if you told me, if you had to choose between only having like sandwiches, say, getting your food calories as food, or calories as fluid, you would absolutely choose calories as fluid every time, because you can make it without the food because you have calories in the fluid, but you can't make it without the fluid because the system will just shut down. Okay, so that those Perform calories become more important. I definitely go back and look at the labels again. I am 99.9% sure that your scoops at home is the same as a bottle. 20 ounces of Ironman Perform on the course is 175 calories. And if the sweat test says that you need 40 ounces of fluid an hour, then you need it. And then I would plan on eating at least one thing during that period of time. And that is something that you train. So ideally, we're talking about the 6 weeks out from your race, and you've got a Saturday and a Sunday ride for the next, say, 4 weeks. You've got 8 rides to test out 2 bottles an hour plus some sort of food as a tool, and then we see how you function. If that seems to work, maybe you try a half a bar as well. Or if that's too much, maybe we dial back a little bit. But ultimately, practice makes perfect. And in many ways, part of the training process will be training to absorb and take in those calories. Not that you can train your stomach to get better at absorbing, but you can do a better job of consuming those calories over time. Definitely some point in time on the Ironman or half Ironman bike, your body kind of pushes back and says, hey, I can't take any more, and you kind of dial things down. But the goal is that we exit the bike really not having lost any water weight because the cost of the run is so high that we can't possibly keep up with our nutrition and hydration. So it's really critical that you can be fully topped off exiting that bike so you can run well. The majority of people are under-fueled on the bike or under-hydrated, and that combination or either one of those situations will definitely lead to a problem later in the race. We had a call today with someone who did Ironman Texas, and he had run into some issues with nutrition, and as a result, his heart rate was substantially higher on the bike for the entire day, 8 beats higher than normal on the bike. And as a result, while I was able to sustain that on the bike, which is a testament to his fitness and mental focus and everything, it really destroyed his run and led him to run significantly slower than his ability. So, keeping those two things together are important: the hydration and the calories. And I definitely recommend you test it out. All right. All right. Chris says, this year I'm doing most of my tests indoors, using outdoors to see if my outdoor guess is appropriate. Do you have any thoughts on indoor testing in the out season, early spring, versus rolling terrains outdoor during race season? Yes. I think both tests are important. I think testing outside is important because testing outside requires skill and nuance, more so than riding indoors. And it's also more appropriate for what you'll be doing outside. I can easily hit 350 watts, for example, outside on my bike, but I can't do that inside on the trainer if you paid me to. So I think it's important to have that dichotomy between the two. If you're training to do an indoor time trial, then yeah, you want all those tests to be inside. But for the most part, when you're in season, we want you testing outside. And I'm not worried about your indoor number matching up with your outdoor number. In many cases, your outdoor number is anywhere between 5 to 10% higher, just by virtue of the work you can do, assuming you have a fair course and you're good at testing. Outside, you can just do more work. So if you are really being a lab rat and getting all geeked out, then maybe you do want to keep all the tests in the same exact place, or if that's the way it works for you and you like to keep the bike on the trainer during the week and it's safer, then go for it. But in general, I like to mix it up, and I prefer to have you testing where you're going to be racing. Ultimately, that's what matters. And, think about it. If you only had an indoor FTP of 240, but when you ride outside, you can easily ride 240 for longer because you spend so much time on rolling terrain, etc. Then you're really leaving something on the table you can be taking advantage of, especially as the race distances you're choosing get shorter. Right? Because the EN info says 20-ounce bottles, 135 calories. Please send me that link, Jerry, because that would definitely be an error. Let me see here. I am. Hold on. When I look at Ironman Perform Nutrition, hold on. Bear with me. It must be me typing 3 instead of 7. Clearly, that must be the article I've written just for the men's 40 to 44 age group to try and mess them up, so they can't possibly compete with me on race day. All right, let's see here. Yeah. Sodium, calories. Yeah, it's got 70 calories per 8 ounces, so that's 175. So that's just bad math here. I'll just give you this link. Jerry, no worries. Happy to help you out. Chris says that this testing outside yields lower numbers because the descents seem to have a bigger impact, lowering the P norm than capping the effort on the climbs. I would argue, I'm not sure how steep the descents are there for you, Chris, but I would argue that, assuming that it's not beyond 4% or something like that, and it's not safe, for to be flying down that descent, that it could just be fluency on testing. I bet you'd be able to put up, I bet if you tested outside a couple times, by the time August or September rolled around, you'd be putting up numbers equal to or better than what you do indoors. But again, ultimately, testing and riding that way outside is more important because that's where you'll be racing. You need to be managing your power and rolling on hills, etc. Be better at that. Lowering that BI, which is a skill you need on race day, and just having a higher number because you got a higher number, but it happened to be vacuum. All right. All right. Let's see. Brad says, building on Chris's question, I may be the oddball on the team, but I could swear that I'm able to ride at a higher FTP on levels on my trainer versus outside. How do I account or adjust for that? Brad, the best way to account or adjust for that is to test outside because you're going to be racing outside. So the reason why we have you test outside before your race is so that you can say, hey, when I'm outside with X and Y on my bike, etc., and conditions of Z, this is the number that I get, so that's a fair number. The last thing we want you to do is use a number from last year or use a number from indoors and think that's going to equal the number from outdoors. Or have you do a 5K, you live at altitude, but you do your 5K at sea level and you crush it, and you come back to altitude where you can be racing and you try and do these numbers and you can't sustain it. That's ultimately what we don't want. And so when I think about your testing, it has to be specific to the environment in which you plan on executing. And if you don't have that option, you live in Alaska and there's snow on the ground or tundra or something, then fine. Or you live on the side of a mountain. If you can't just go up it for your test, there's some rolling hills that really get in the way, then it's not ideal. But finding a way to get a test done in the environment in which you'll be racing is critical. Because it's a lot more than just that number on the dial. Like my comment to Chris before, it's not just about how high can I get that number. If you're just chasing that number, you're kind of missing the point. That number is the manifestation of all the hard work you've done for a couple weeks. It's not just that day. You know, I mean, if it was just that day, then we would all just, I don't know, have like 10 cups of coffee and 16 Red Bulls and whatever else you possibly eat, and then just kill yourself for a couple, minutes and be like, this is my new number when I'm hopped up on, caffeine and everything else. And we don't necessarily want that, okay? And also remember that testing numbers are only part of the equation. For more advanced athletes, sometimes moving that number, which may be very close to your, I don't want to say your genetically predisposed peak fitness, that can kind of get hard. But maybe it'd be easier for you to lose 5 pounds. If you're you can choose, like, do I want to murder myself for 6 weeks to get my threshold power from 220 to 235 watts? Or do I just want to lose 5 pounds? What would be easier for you? In some cases, sometimes losing that weight is a simpler task than the alternative, which is trying to do more work, especially as the volume goes up. So again, testing is a number, it's an indicator, but it's not the be-all, end-all. All right, and that's something else that is important to be mindful of. All right. Well, awesome. Al, Brad, Chris, David, Jerry, Carrie, Laura, Mary, Michael, and Susan. Awesome to have you guys here tonight. Chris, don't admit the Red Bull thing. Don't do it, brother. My Diet Coke is my weakness, and that's bad enough. So I want to thank you guys for tuning in to our Tuesday, May 27th, 2014 Coaches Chat, talking about the relevance and importance of in-season testing and introducing the members-only in-season testing decision-making flow chart, which I'll probably rename and make it better. Hopefully you can use this tool or the micro forum to connect with me, or the other forums to connect with your fellow athletes as a tool to decide whether or not in-season testing makes sense for you. Again, remember, at the end of the day, when it comes to race day, we want you to have as much information and as much accurate information as possible so you can make the right decisions based on the challenges you are faced with, whether it be terrain, whether it be conditions, whether it be fatigue, and ultimately help you have the best possible race you can have despite that. Right? Now, at the end of the day, race day is just about solving problems, and if you can solve some problems ahead of time by knowing what your true bike, run, and swim fitness is, you'll go a long way to reaching your true physical potential on race day. This is Coach Patrick from Endurance Nation signing off, home of the world's largest and most active online triathlon team. Over 800 members training together online, meeting up at races, training camps, you name it. We are the 2013 Global Ironman Tri-Club World Champions, and we are on our way to defending that title. You can't take it away, people. You can try, but you can't do it. This is Coach Patrick signing off. Thanks again for tuning in. I'll see you guys online or at the races. See you guys.